Hollywood has always sold us dreams, glittering premieres, radiant smiles, and love stories that seemed too perfect to be real. But behind the velvet ropes and studio gates, a far more complicated world was unfolding. Old Hollywood was built on illusion, and nowhere was that illusion more carefully constructed than in the private lives of its biggest stars. The men and women who lit up the silver screen were living double lives, passionate, scandalous, heartbreaking, and often dangerous. Their affairs were hidden not out of shame alone, but out of survival. In the golden age of the studio system, your career was owned by powerful executives who controlled everything from the roles you played to the person you were allowed to love. Contracts came with morality clauses. Publicists manufactured romances. And gossip columnists held careers in the palms of their hands. What follows are 21 hidden affairs that didn't just create personal drama. They shifted the very foundations of Hollywood culture, challenged the era's rigid social rules, and left behind legacies that still echo today. Jean Harlow, the platinum-haired sensation who became one of MGM's most bankable stars in the early 1930s, was known for her sharp wit and magnetic sensuality on screen. Off-screen, she found something far more tender in William Powell, a refined, accomplished actor whose sophistication complemented Harlow's electric energy. The two became deeply devoted to each other, though they never married. Powell had endured 2 failed marriages and was cautious about committing again, yet his affection for Harlow was unmistakable to everyone around them. He spoiled her with gifts and attention, and their relationship, though quiet and largely shielded from public view, was one of genuine emotional depth. When Harlow died suddenly in 1937 at just 26 years old from kidney failure, Powell was devastated in a way that he would never fully articulate in public. He quietly arranged and paid for her funeral, ensuring she was laid to rest in an elegant gown he had given her, a private gesture of a love that had never needed a headline to be real. Greta Garbo was the most enigmatic star Hollywood ever produced, a woman who seemed to exist slightly outside of ordinary human reality. Her connection with Salka Viertel, a Polish-born actress and screenwriter who had relocated to Hollywood from Europe, was one of the most quietly influential relationships in film history. The two women became inseparable confidants, and many historians believe their bond extended far beyond friendship. Viertel, though married with children, served as Garbo's most trusted advisor and creative collaborator. It was Viertel who suggested the idea for Queen Christina, one of Garbo's most celebrated films, and who co-wrote the screenplay. Their relationship existed in the careful shadows that queer women in Hollywood were forced to inhabit, never named, never confirmed, but palpable to those who knew them. Garbo's love life was a web of intense connections with women, including the flamboyant screenwriter Mercedes de Acosta, but her bond with Viertel remained its quiet, enduring center. Before Alfred Hitchcock made Anthony Perkins immortal as Norman Bates, the young actor was navigating a secret romance with Tab Hunter, the blue-eyed, blonde heartthrob that fan magazines had turned into the embodiment of wholesome American masculinity. The two men met in the mid-1950s and began a carefully concealed relationship that required the kind of theatrical performance in public that rivaled anything either of them did on screen. They attended events with female escorts, smiled for cameras, and maintained the fiction the studios demanded. In private, they found something real. The relationship eventually buckled under the pressure of professional competition. Perkins took a role that Hunter felt should have been his, and the romantic partnership dissolved. Tab Hunter eventually came out publicly in his 2005 memoir, calling the relationship with Perkins one of the most meaningful of his life. It is a story about what it cost two men simply to love each other in an era that refused to allow it. This is not a love story. It is a story about power, silence, and the long shadow of trauma. When Clark Gable and Loretta Young were sent on location to film The Call of the Wild in 1935, the result was a pregnancy that Young would spend decades carefully hiding. Young, deeply Catholic and terrified for her career, did not publicly acknowledge what had happened. She disappeared from public life, gave birth to a daughter named Judy, and then, in an arrangement that reads as heartbreaking in its cleverness, gave the child up for adoption before quietly readopting her, presenting Judy to the world as an orphan she had taken in. Gable, notified of the birth, reportedly destroyed the telegram and walked away. He never acknowledged Judy, never provided support, and never spoke of it publicly. Young herself did not fully address the truth until after her death, through a memoir that confirmed what Judy had long suspected, that the man who refused to know her was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood history. Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Taylor were exactly what Hollywood wanted the world to see. A glamorous, devoted couple whose union seemed to validate the fairy tale the industry was always selling. Behind that image, however, was a relationship that many insiders believed was arranged more by studio calculation than by romantic chemistry. Stanwyck, whose fierce independence and close friendships with women had long been the subject of whispered speculation, was one of the highest-paid performers in Hollywood. Taylor was a handsome leading man whose wholesome image required careful management. Together, their marriage served both of their professional needs admirably. When they divorced in 1951 after more than a decade, it was handled with the same controlled efficiency with which it had been constructed. Whether there was genuine love between them, and many believe there was, complicated and real, the public version of their marriage was always partly a performance, and Hollywood was always the director. Ingrid Bergman had been built up as something close to secular sainthood in the American imagination. A luminous, morally pure figure whose performances in Casablanca and For Whom the Bell Tolls had made her one of the most beloved actresses in the world. When she traveled to Italy to work with director Roberto Rossellini and emerged from the production pregnant with his child, while still legally married to her husband, neurosurgeon Petter Lindstrom, the American public reacted as though a beloved icon had committed a personal betrayal against each of them individually. A United States senator delivered a denunciation of her from the floor of Congress. Her films were boycotted. The press treated her as a fallen woman whose moral corruption was somehow more significant than anything happening in the world around them. Bergman left for Europe, built a life with Rossellini, and had 3 children including the future actress Isabella Rossellini. She eventually returned to Hollywood and won an Academy Award, but the scandal permanently reframed how audiences saw her. A reminder that female stars were held to a standard of purity that had nothing to do with talent and everything to do with control. Rita Hayworth was the most photographed woman in America during the 1940s, and her personal life generated nearly as much attention as her films. Her marriage to the brilliant and erratic Orson Welles was a collision of 2 enormous personalities, passionate, combustible, and ultimately unsustainable. By the time Hayworth encountered Prince Ali Khan on the French Riviera, her marriage was functionally over. Ali Khan, a polo-playing, impossibly charming playboy and spiritual leader, pursued Hayworth with the focused intensity of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Their affair caused international outrage. Columbia Pictures president Harry Cohn reportedly sued Hayworth for breach of contract when she stepped away from filming to be with him. The British press was equally appalled. The couple married in 1949 and welcomed a daughter, but Hayworth eventually grew exhausted by Ali's infidelities and left him. Her romantic life became, in many ways, the story of a woman perpetually defined by men and by a public that could not separate her from the bombshell image it had created. The Hepburn-Tracy romance is one of Hollywood's most enduring myths. 2 great actors, deeply devoted, navigating an affair complicated by Tracy's Catholic refusal to divorce his wife. The reality, according to numerous Hollywood insiders including the legendary fixer Scotty Bowers, was considerably more complicated. Hepburn, according to Bowers and others, was a lesbian who maintained an elaborate public persona of heterosexual devotion, while Tracy himself was reportedly bisexual. The studio system of the Golden Age was extraordinarily skilled at manufacturing exactly these kinds of narratives, pairing stars whose real lives required protection with partners whose image needs aligned. Whether or not the full account of Bowers is accepted, Hepburn herself acknowledged to her biographer that her relationship with Tracy was deeply complicated and not easily categorized. What is certain is that she was loyal to him, devoted to him in her way, and that he struggled significantly with alcoholism and depression throughout their years together. The love, whatever its precise nature, was real, just not the simple, radiant thing the publicity machine described. Liza Minnelli, already royalty by virtue of her parentage as the daughter of Judy Garland and director Vincente Minnelli, married Australian entertainer Peter Allen in 1967 in what appeared to be a union built on shared passion for performance and mutual admiration. What Minnelli did not know was that Alan was gay. The discovery, which she made under circumstances too painful to be anything other than humiliating, reframed the entire relationship. Minnelli processed it eventually with the dark humor that has always been one of her survival mechanisms, but the damage was real. The marriage limped forward through mutual infidelities and professional pressures before finally dissolving in 1974. Alan went on to a significant career as a songwriter. He co-wrote I Honestly Love You and Don't Cry Out Loud, and was open about his sexuality in his later years before his death from AIDS-related complications in 1992. For Minnelli, the marriage was an early lesson in the gap between the romantic stories she had been raised on and the complicated truth of real human lives. Charlie Chaplin's genius as a filmmaker was matched by a personal life that, examined honestly, is deeply troubling. His relationship with Lita Grey began when she was a teenager working as an extra on one of his productions, and by the time she was 16, she was pregnant by the 35-year-old Chaplin. The marriage that followed, held hastily in Mexico to avoid scrutiny, was by all accounts a misery from its earliest days. Chaplin reportedly resented the situation, took his frustrations out on Grey, and engaged in ongoing infidelities throughout their time together. When they divorced in 1927, the legal proceedings became one of the biggest scandals in Hollywood history, with court documents detailing abuse, control, and moral hypocrisy that the public devoured with a mixture of shock and fascination. The scandal damaged Chaplin's reputation significantly, though his talent ultimately preserved his career. For Lita Grey, the marriage was a formative wound, the experience of a young woman whose youth was exploited by a powerful man who faced far fewer consequences than she did. Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier were, to the public, the very definition of theatrical royalty. Two magnificent actors whose love seemed destined by some poetic logic. The reality was that their union began in betrayal. Both were married to other people when they fell in love in the late 1930s, and both eventually left their spouses to be together. Olivier later admitted with striking candor that he had married his first wife, Jill Esmond, largely because he couldn't envision doing better, a confession that speaks to the casual cruelties the era allowed men to commit without much consequence. His affair with Leigh unfolded alongside stage and film work that,